Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. If you are in the middle of doubt, deconstruction, and the dark night of the soul, you do not have to do it alone. Join our private Facebook group, Deconversion Anonymous, and become a part of the community. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. Thank you to all the supporters of the podcast. If you too would like an ad-free experience of the podcast, you can become a supporter at patreon.com/gracefulatheist. Please consider rating and reviewing the podcast on the Apple Podcast Store and on Spotify, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. My guest today is Steve Ghikadis. Steve has written an amazing book called Humanism from the Heart, Building Bridges Beyond Belief. Steve Ghikadis is a humanist officiant who conducts secular marriages, memorials, and many more meaningful life-affirming celebrations. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and a Bachelor of Education in primary, junior, and intermediate grades. Raised as a freethinker, Steve has been married to a Christian for now over a decade. He and his wife Cindy believe in the importance of bridging the gap between believers and non-believers. Their two young children are being raised in an interfaith household and are free to choose their own path. He serves as an ambassador for Humanist Canada, Recovering from Religion, and Sunday Assembly. I think you're going to love Steve, and I think you're going to love his book, Humanism from the Heart. He's going to talk about being a humanist and being married to a believer, what that's like to try to raise kids. Here is Steve Ghikadis. Steve Ghikadis, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's such an exciting experience to be on here. I've been a fan for, 6 years you've been doing this now? 7 years almost?
Yeah. There was a bit of a hiatus there, but since 2019. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Steve, you are a humanist officiant, a public speaker, an award-winning author, and you've recently written a book called Humanism from the Heart. I got a copy of this and I just thought, man, this is amazing. You know, you're kind of put onto paper a lot of the things that I'm trying to express all the time. So I was really excited to have you on.
Well, that's awesome. I'm so glad you got something out of it.
Yeah. Steve, as you know, the price of admission on the show is to tell the story of what religion played as you grew up. I know you took a bit of a circuitous route. So tell us a bit about what that was like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised as a freethinker, and I always like to say accidentally raised as a freethinker because my mom didn't really know what she was doing, but she did all the right things, which was allowing me to be unlabeled, allowing me to experience things, just firsthand and not ever being forced to believe or to pray or anything like that for answers. So I just had the freedom to explore, and I think that was a really excellent opportunity that was provided to me. I was baptized Anglican, and we maybe went once or twice. I joked about this on the show Life After Faith with Drew Ghikadis. There's a picture of me in the Sunday school that's buried under the church, I think, because it's like in a time capsule or something.
Right.
So I said, if I happen to die in that 100-year period before they dig it up, I can say, get to the pearly gates and be like, Peter, is it? Dig under the church there and you'll find a picture of me in church. So, free pass to get in, but yeah. So no, I just was able to explore all the different aspects of belief, non-belief, and I went through different periods of thinking like maybe the ancient alien theory is correct, maybe the Greek gods are real, because they always talk about the top of Mount Olympus coming off. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a UFO or something. So just lots of different conspiratorial thinking and other things just kind of over the years played a little part in my discovery and exploration of that. So yeah, and I just never really bought into the idea of supernatural elements being real.
Okay. I like a couple of quotes. I'm probably going to quote you back to yourself a bunch of times. I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
You said that you weren't told what to think, but taught how to think. I think that's beautiful. And you talk about that belief isn't a choice, right? You're either convinced or you're not convinced.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like for most of your growing up years, you were not convinced.
Right. And there were times where, maybe something, pushed me in one direction or another. I think I told the story in there about the Kung Fu camp, where at one point they were talking about how Jesus was probably coming back to this little tiny town in Ontario where I grew up. and they were talking about building a temple for Jesus. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to be part of something huge. And then I thought for a minute, wait a minute, does this make any sense?
Right.
And
Right.
so I was able to use critical thinking to go like, you know what, maybe these people, even though they're way older than me and they seem to know a lot about life, I don't think they really know what they're talking about.
Right. We'll probably talk about this more later in the show a bit, but you did have a brief period of time where you maybe called yourself a Christian or went to church as you were beginning a relationship with your wife. Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the Masonic Lodge as promised to my late grandfather, who was a master mason. And I thought, this is a really cool organization because it's a secret organization, so they probably do some cool stuff behind the scenes. So they ask ahead of time if you are a believer in a higher power. So I was like, oh man, I don't know what to say. I guess like when I walk under power lines, there's a higher power than me, because at the time I didn't really believe it. I called myself an apatheist looking back, like somebody who just didn't care about religion. And I had so many different friends that were different backgrounds and beliefs that I just kind of saw it for what it was, which is just everyone trying to tell a story of who we are, where we're going, that type of thing. So I kind of grit my teeth and said, yeah, sure, I believe in a higher power. And they're like, okay, cool, you're in. And then we were going through the stages of becoming a Mason, and basically they put a bag over your head and they bring you through this door and they put a sword to your heart. At that point, they just say, how do you come? And then someone whispers in your ear, in peace. So I'm like, in peace? So they let you through and they kneel you down at the altar and they say, who do you put your trust in? And then they whisper in your ear, in God. So I was like, in God, with a question mark? And then they're like, yay, they go through the whole process.
Right.
And then so, it was a lot of pomp and circumstance, and I got to learn a lot of stories of the Bible from going through these ceremonies. And at the same time, I had met my wife, the girl who would be my wife, at a party. And she was coming down the stairs, and I thought she looked really cute. I didn't say a word to her. I grabbed a piece of ice cream cake and I shoved it on the side of her face. And then I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And I started eating it off of her face. Right. It was just kind of a weird, like serendipitous moment, but I was just,
me too. Yes. I think.
Yeah. So so I was smitten by her. So I did that. And, afterwards I got embarrassed. So I went upstairs and I turned around and she's right there. And we started talking and we had a lot in common. And I didn't really realize at the time that she was a Christian. But then when I found out, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to the Masonic Lodge and I'm learning about Christianity. And I was baptized Anglican, so maybe there's something to this. Spoiler alert, there wasn't. But, we had gone to church together for a while. And then we were actually going to her family's church when we moved to the area where we live now. And so everyone just assumed that I was Christian. And I just kind of pretended to, go along to get along kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at one point, they were passing the plate around and they were like, oh yeah, we're going to have you guys pass the plate around and we're going to have you guys light the Christ candle and we're going to have this. And I'm just like, whoa. Maybe I'm getting a little too deep here.
Yeah.
And, and we had our wedding there. And then at the reception, her parents, amazing people. I love both of them. We lost my father-in-law a few years ago, but they both said, we're so happy she met a man who believes the exact same thing she does. And I'm like, oh, shoot, because I don't.
Yeah.
So I'm like, now I feel like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I already kind of did, but now it's like really in the forefront, right? So I was just I kind of lashed out and became kind of angry. And then when they would ask if I was going to church, I'd be like, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to church. And, I kind of burned some bridges. And that was when I decided like I need to find a way to rebuild some of these bridges that I burned, get back in the good graces of everybody, including my wife, right? Because I'd said some pretty nasty things when I was going through that phase. And it is a normal phase. I've learned, that there's so many people that go through that phase when I was more mad at myself than anybody else for duping people into thinking I was something that I wasn't. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of people too that feel like they're being lied to. So they also go through that phase. And that phase can last a long time, right? There's some people that can be angry for years and years and years. Luckily, I was able to pull myself out of it. And that was by doing some research, finding people like Anthony Magnabosco, who was doing the street epistemology stuff.
Okay, yeah.
And then Dale McGowan, who wrote books on interfaith relationships and parenting and a mixed faith relationship. So those are the types of people that I latched onto and I reached out to. And I said, hey, can you help me? And I also at the same time discovered recovering from religion, which then I later, when I was done going through this process of, making myself a better person, I ended up reaching out to them and volunteering with them and got quite high in the organization to be able to help other people recover from harmful aspects of religion, and then also harmful aspects of, I would say atheism, or just, becoming an angry atheist.
Sure. Yeah, big fan of Recovering from Religion. I love the work they're doing, as well as with the Secular Therapy Project over there. Like all the work they're doing is amazing, and it tells us a lot, that you volunteer there and have been a part of their organization. So that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And you've had Daryl Ray on, you've had Rachel Hunt on,
That's right.
You've been involved with them, and there's such great people and a great organization for assisting people in all aspects of their journey.
Yeah, I have just had the chance to be on their RFRX podcast, and
Right.
one of the things we talked about was that religious people feel less judgment talking to RFR than maybe their own churches, because there's not that vested interest in their faith system or dogma and that kind of thing. So they're doing really great work there.
Yeah, for sure. And I've had quite a few calls like that where people are like, wow, you actually listen to what I have to say,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know if you remember V. La Bianca from the community. Yeah. So they at one point said that recovering from religion is like sending up a prayer, but you actually get an answer. So I thought that was kind of a cool quote.
I love it. Love it. Yeah. So one of the ironies, I think, about being a secular person, being a humanist, is that we actually become more aware of religion and why people are drawn to it. And you, as a secular officiant, maybe even more so. What do you think it is that people like? What's the positive thing that people get out of religion?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's a lot of things that people get out of religion. And one of the biggest things, there's quite a few studies on this, and it talks about how community is actually one of the biggest draws to religion. So, less about the theology and more about the community, more about the people that are asking you how your mother's doing after she recovered from, stage 3 brain cancer or something, right? I don't even know if you can survive that, but, just there's tons of people there that are asking you things about your family, asking you things about yourself, making you feel like you're an important person. And I think that, because religious groups have had the monopoly on that for so long, it's really difficult to get our foot in the door in the secular world for that. There are some organizations that we'll probably talk about later as well that are doing a good job at that. Just we don't have the time and the, we don't have the finances that certain organizations have to be able to support people in the same ways. So I think that's one of the biggest things. Another thing that people find is meaning, right? A lot of times people derive their meaning from their religious belief, especially if it's an important one that's been passed on from generation to generation. So you feel almost like a familial tie to the belief itself. And I think that's what really keeps a lot of people in. And I don't want to say this in a mean way, but almost like the guilt, right? And it's one thing I found online I thought was really funny is they say, what tradition is, and tradition is just guilt from dead people.
Yes.
And I think that's a huge thing that ties people to their belief system as well.
Yeah.
And, the one thing that I always have a hard time with is when people try to tear people's beliefs away from them without understanding why the people have those beliefs. And I think that that's the one thing that you and I are kind of on the same page with, the whole idea of grace, like secular grace, giving people the grace to fully understand where they're coming from and understand why it is that they believe what they believe. Because, maybe it's the only thing that's really tying them together. Maybe it's a load-bearing Jesus that they have, right?
Ooh, I like that. Load-bearing Jesus. I like that. I'm gonna steal that, Steve. I'm gonna use that.
Definitely. And it's important for people to understand, especially people who are in our shoes where we don't have any supernatural beliefs, right? To understand why people might find meaning in that, and then just to allow them to express that, but also keep it a safe place and not allow them to cause harm to themselves or to others as well.
Right. Yeah. I sometimes say it's the collective search, the human search for meaning. Right. And actually you say it much better. So I'm going to quote you again. Whether we find our answers through faith or reason, we're searching for the same things: understanding, purpose, and true human connection. In a different place in the book, you say, we can bridge the gap between believers and non-believers by focusing less on winning arguments and more on fostering understanding. This doesn't mean compromising reason or evidence. It means being considerate of the human need for meaning. So that made me love you immediately, Steve, reading those things. That is absolutely.
Don't tell my wife.
Yes, exactly. We won't tell our wives, respective wives. Yes. But yeah, I think there's so much of a tendency to burn the bridges behind us, to be right. That urge to be right can get in the way of our need to be connected, and the connection is the thing that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I always say this, I don't mind being wrong, because then I can be right later on when I learn information, right? Like there's times, like my wife is a pharmacist and she knows so much more about medication and things like that, right? And I'll think I know something, and then I'll say something and she'll be like, no.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, okay, well, can you tell me what it is so that I know next time I don't sound like an idiot, right?
Yeah.
So that happens a lot. But I was actually on a podcast with a Christian apologist, and the podcast was called the Irrational Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And actually he borrowed, I think he borrowed that line from my book about, faith and reason, because that's basically what he used as kind of like the guiding posts for this discussion. And I think he wanted maybe a little bit more controversy than there actually was, because, my whole shtick, if you want to call it that, is I'm trying to find ways that we can build those bridges and find that common ground, common understanding, because I find that all the supernatural elements, it doesn't matter if they're real or not. It doesn't matter if there's a god or 10 gods or no gods at all. We still have to be there for each other, and we have to be present in people's lives. We have to make sure that people are eating and drinking and getting the shelter that they need and all those things. So to me, the smaller questions about where the universe came from, to me, that's a small question, because nobody knows the answer to that.
Yeah.
It might not have come from anywhere, might have always been here, but it doesn't really matter, right? We just need to focus on the here and now and who it is that we're surrounded with.
Yeah, I love that. I've been accused of being ruthlessly practical at times. And, like actually taking care of the people around you is more important than maybe the deep questions.
Yeah. And I think that, you probably get pushed back on it too. Like I get pushed back from all angles, because I'm kind of like too generous to religious people. And then I'm also, sometimes the religious people will say, well, you're also, a staunch atheist and whatnot. And it's like,
right.
Yeah. Cause I built my foundation. I'm pretty sure that there is no gods. Do I know for sure? Absolutely not. I don't know for sure. But like from what I can see and what I've, researched and, all the evidence, I'm not convinced by it.
Right.
So I do get a lot of pushback from religious people, but at the same time, I get a lot of pushback from atheists and other people that are secularists, because they are like, oh yeah, you're just being too nice and too generous.
Yeah. You just can't win.
No. Yeah.
Definitely the irony of what we're describing is a narrow path. Right?
Yeah, it is.
The irony of that, of trying to walk that line of being empathetic, being open to where people are at, and also holding the line for reason and truth, is a very, very difficult thing to do.
It's a delicate balance. It's almost like we're walking through the eye of a needle, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've heard that somewhere. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Confucius or something?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So, many people have said that atheism, or calling oneself an atheist, really answers just one question: whether you believe gods exist or not. Humanism, on the other side, is really a positive life philosophy. I think that every humanist I've ever spoken to has kind of a different definition. So I'm really curious, what do you feel humanism is?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And I think that with me being a humanist officiant, when we went through the training program to learn how to be officiants, they really said to us at one point, like, we need to come up with an elevator pitch for what humanism is, because you're going to get asked, what is this humanism thing that you're talking about? Because usually when you start a wedding, you say, my name is Steve Ghikadis. I'm a humanist officiant, licensed by Humanist Canada to conduct weddings in Ontario, Canada. Right. And people are like, whoa, what is this humanism thing?
Right.
So it depends on who I'm talking to, because there's, specifically secular humanism is the non-religious version of humanism.
Mm-hmm.
But there also is, religious humanism, right? Mm-hmm. So, and we can get into that a little bit later as well, but I get a lot of pushback from people when I say that I can consider someone to be a humanist even if they're religious, if they're following the principles of humanism. And then when I say the principles of humanism, I talk about empathy, compassion, human dignity, scientific investigation, well-being, that type of thing. So when I do talk to people about the elevator pitch, I usually say it's a philosophical worldview, which puts the highest emphasis on dignity, compassion, well-being, and scientific investigation. So that's how I basically say it. But if someone says, "Well, is it what do you mean by secular humanist?" I usually say I'll add on, it's a non-religious philosophical worldview.
Right.
But my wife even considers herself to be a humanist Christian.
Right.
Like that's how she would describe herself, because she believes in the supernatural elements of Christianity. But, in the here and now, she's more focused on people and the rest of us. So
I love that. I'm not sure that my wife is also a believer, but I'm not sure that she would maybe take that moniker for herself, but she absolutely is a religious humanist.
yeah. Sometimes labels can be helpful, but also sometimes labels can be a hindrance too, because
Sure.
sometimes people will hear something like atheist and they'll just assume like, oh, you're saying absolutely 100% there's no God. And it's like, no, it's just the lack of belief in a God. But it depends on if you're taking it as a philosophical stance or if you're just taking it as a colloquial stance, right? So you never know what people are explaining when they say their labels, and labels are supposed to be helpful. So I try and keep it as straightforward as possible. So I always say I'm an agnostic atheist. So I don't believe in any deities, but I don't know for sure. And then I'm a secular humanist because I practice the principles of humanism.
Amazing. Really quick, I just want to keep going on the religious humanism for a second. I feel like we're in a weird time in history.
Yeah.
Where from the 1900s on, a focus on fundamentalism in a way that maybe hasn't always been the case. The social gospel was much more important in the 1800s, and like actually feeding the poor and visiting people in prison and things that we would recognize as religious humanism. And it just is out of vogue right now. And I think that is to the detriment of everyone, right? I would much rather be working alongside, as a secular humanist, I would rather be working alongside religious humanists to do good in the world than the current scenario that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, for sure. I've even been on a few shows on, on the internet where people will call in and it's like, is this person really a Christian? Because the way they're talking to me doesn't, come across as being loving,
right,
or, caring about other people and stuff. So it's just, it's very funny. And with this whole thing about empathy being a bad thing, just really boggles my mind, because empathy is like the most important thing.
Right.
Like, if you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, that's the way that you're going to understand the world. And that's how you're going to understand other people and how you're going to be able to put your time and effort into making the world a better place.
I love it. I wanted to pose a question to you specifically because of my audience. So a lot of my audience is going through the process of deconstruction. Some of them might completely deconvert or completely take on the moniker of atheist. I know I'm asking you to be evangelistic here, but why humanism? Why should someone going through that process? Because the big buzzword out there is deconstruction and reconstruction, right?
Right.
There's a ton of what I call progressive apologists who are saying, here, you can stay in Christianity, right?
Yeah.
So what's the positive argument for humanism? Why should they land there?
I'll definitely focus on that, but I do want to mention what you just said about apologetics. So I think apologetics is about keeping people in the faith, not necessarily convincing people that are outside the faith, right? It's just giving the people that are in the faith a reason to continue believing. And that's one thing I've noticed from actually speaking to apologists. I'm like, do you actually think that this is convincing to people? And it's almost like you can see the veil, right? Like you can see what it is that they're trying to do. And what they're trying to do is provide information for people to keep them in the faith.
I totally agree with that, by the way. Like every apologist I've ever spoken to, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like, just some of the ones I'm seeing online right now too. And it's like, they've even been like debunked as being like lying about certain things. And, I don't blame people for wanting to lie to be able to keep a belief system that they find important. Right. So like, again, I'm going to give them grace in that sense. That's what I see is from the outside looking in. I see it as them putting in the work to try and keep people in. It's definitely hard because because they do twist things, right? And if you watch the episode of Irrational that I did with the apologist, you can see how I just let him talk, because it's like I just wanted him to get his words out so that he could feel heard.
Yeah.
And then I would just slightly push back. I wouldn't even really push back that much.
Sure.
I would just explain how, and what I'm going to talk about right now, how humanism is kind of more of a superior way to live your life.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when I wrote this book, I wasn't trying to say like humanism is the only way that you can live and be a good person and all that stuff. What I was trying to say is, here's the day in the life of someone who's a humanist.
Right.
If this works for you, that's cool. And hopefully it does, because it's a great way to live. And when I say a great way to live, I mean, first of all, I feel free to be able to research what I want, to be able to look into different systems of belief and different, studies on things. But not only that, it's like, it has all of the most important parts that people want to get from their religion without the baggage attached to it. So I don't know if you remember David C. Smalley from back in the day.
Yeah, vaguely. Yeah.
Yeah. So he had a show called Dogma Debate, and he would always use this analogy where he'd say there's like a bottle of cola, and what's in the cola? Well, it's got water, it's got sugar, it's got syrup, it's got coloring, it's got all this junk in it, right? And basically he said, if you can take your hand and you can go in and you can pull out the sugar, and you can pull out the syrup, and you pull out the coloring, and you pull out all the other gunk, and what you have left over is water. And water is the humanism. So you don't need any of this extra stuff that's really going to, maybe cause harm to your system, right? All you need is the water that's underneath, and that's the thing that's sustaining your life. And that's the way I always thought about humanism. It's like, this is all the good things from the religions that, they've been trying to get for so long. And they didn't really realize that underneath everything they've been doing is that humanism that they need to, put as the forefront of their belief system. So.
Were we secretly separated as children?
Yeah, maybe. I think you're younger than me, though. So
yes, no, I've got quite a few decades probably on you. But yeah, what I loved about reading your book, Steve, was that you were again putting in much more eloquent words all the things that I'm thinking, all the things that I'm often trying to express, and that is one of them. I use the analogy of a spirograph Venn diagram of all the world religions, and if you punch out the hole in the middle, which is the supernatural bits, what's left is humanism, right? What they all share basically is be good to each other.
Yeah. So, or like I say in the book, don't be a dick.
Yes, there you go. Hey, much more. Let's see. That's the right way to say it. So, I love it.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the very real things that people go through is the loss of a loved one. And particularly for people who had faith at one point in time, were a part of a religious community, and then come out of that, the first time they experience that loss and grief as a secular person, it can be devastating.
Yeah.
You talk about in your book losing a few people. You've already mentioned your father-in-law. What was that experience like as a secular person for yourself? And then what would you say to somebody who's maybe going through that?
Yeah. So what I'm hoping to do eventually is do my master's in something like social work or something like that, so that I can actually be a humanist chaplain.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you've heard, I think you even had a humanist chaplain on your podcast.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So just, being able to provide that support for people going through the grieving process and things. And I was even talking to somebody the other day about how cool it would be to go to like a hospice where you can just go from room to room and you can be whoever that person wants you to be. If that person wants you to sit there and pray with them, I'll sit there and pray with them. If they want me to be, their son who doesn't come to visit them, I'll be their son who doesn't come to visit them. And I think that is kind of what, like, doing that is kind of the representation of what it is that we need to be for people when they're going through these grieving processes. When someone says, like, sorry for your loss, tell me what I can do. Right. And a lot of people won't express, I need you to come and water my flowers, or I need you to come and cut the lawn or something like that. So, and I don't want to say that you should push people into telling you what they want you to do, but just maybe be there for them in case there is something like that. Show up with a meal or something, right? For them to just not have to worry about dinner for that night.
Right.
So actually going and physically doing something for them is a really good thing, to show them that you care and to show them that they're not alone. Because the biggest thing when you lose somebody is you feel like you've lost a part of your own life. So, my father-in-law, I've known him for, a decade, and it was like a big loss because, he felt like a father figure to me as well.
Mm.
And also he was a grandfather to my children, and my children were really young when we lost him. And it was devastating to be able to tell them, that he's no longer here. And then within the same week, telling them that my grandmother, their great grandmother, had also passed.
Mm.
And it was like just a double whammy, and it was just like, well, are we going to get to see them again? And it's like, well, that's a good question. It depends on what you believe, because, for me, I don't think so. I think that they made an important mark on our hearts. And I think that their story is important to continue on, to tell that story. But then, go ask your mom, because mom might think that you get to see them again too. Right. So just having my kids be able to go and ask each of us questions about what we think happens, and they can develop their own belief or outlook on things. But yeah, one of the most important things to do is just to be there for people and to listen to what they have to say, especially when they're grieving, because they even if they they express negativity towards the person, it's important for them to get that out. There's somebody that I know that their parent passed away, and it was like a huge relief to them. And they were just like, that person was a horrible person. And they just told me all about it. I'm like, yeah, I'm really sorry that this all happened and that you were in this situation. And, just having that conversation allowed them to vent out their frustrations, but then also say, but I really loved them too. And just be able to get that out.
I can relate to that story. My mom passed away 8 months after I deconverted. So
Oh, yeah.
So it was very soon afterwards, and I had a very complicated relationship with her. So
right.
I always talk about the reality of no longer having I think in this case, false comfort that I would see her again.
Right.
Allowed me to grieve, though, in a real way. It was maybe more painful in the short run, but in the long run, I was able to get to, and I love you, right? Like to get past some of the complicated feelings that I have. And I feel like it is so easy to say you get to see this person again, and it is just thin gruel. I don't know how to express it better.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's it's really impactful thing that you had to go through, and it's good for you to be able to share that with other people as well who might be feeling the same way, and maybe they feel like they're alone because they're like, oh, I can't believe that I had such a horrible relationship with this person, but then I really do miss them and I really do love them.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about is kind of like passing the buck down the road, because if you think that you have more time, or you think that you have infinite time to make amends with somebody, or to tell them that you love them or something, it makes it a little bit more difficult to act in the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that because we have the outlook that we don't get another chance to do this is the time that we can do this. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Invention of Lying.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that movie hit me really hard because there's so many things about death that are frightening to people. And I think that this is probably one of the things that caused the initial spark of religion to happen, right? Because people don't want to die. They don't want this to be the end. They want to continue on. I mean, I would want to continue on. I don't want it to be the end either, right? But I just don't happen to believe that there's anything beyond. But I also don't want to take that away from somebody. If that's your comfort, and you think that you're going to be seeing your family again, and you think that you're going to be, going somewhere important, you're going to be important, or whatever it is, I don't want to take that from people. So that's one of those things that really tugs at my heart when I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're starting to show cracks in their belief system. And I decide at that point, like, this person wants to talk about this, but do I really want to talk about it any further than this? Because I don't want to take their comfort away.
I think that is so important. And I don't think we talk about that enough. As somebody is starting to express doubt, you as a secular person can feel, victory is at hand.
Mm.
But really taking into account what that person is about to give up, and are they really ready to do that, is a question that needs to be asked.
Yeah.
And especially in a time of grief, that is not the time to try to deconvert somebody.
No, absolutely not. Well, it's just like, if you're at a funeral and they're using it as like an altar call, right? You don't want to do the same thing to somebody else
Right,
when they're
exactly.
in that same situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing that we have in common is our respective wives are believers. We've already mentioned that somewhat religious humanists in their own rights. I want to hear a little bit about what that was like. You talked about letting people believe that you were a Christian for a while. So what was it like telling your wife the truth? And then how have you made that work?
That is a really good question.
Yes.
And it's not really something that I've broken down before. When I was writing the book, there were things that I had in the book that I actually had to remove because I wanted to respect her privacy.
Yeah.
And I actually had to read it first because I wanted her perspective first before I put it out. And there were certain parts where she was like, "Oh, this cuts too deep. This is too much of our life here." And I was like, "Yeah, totally. I'm going to cut that part out." So the parts of her life and our life together that I can share, the very first thing I said to her about not going to church anymore was just that. I said, "I don't think I can go to church anymore."
Okay.
And it was like, at first she was like, "Oh yeah, no problem," because she just, I don't know if she knew, or if she thought like, okay, maybe I just need a break or something like that, right? And it was just, when I was working with recovering from religion, which came later, a little bit later than this, I learned about Greta Christina, and Greta Christina wrote a book where she said, like, the worst thing you can do is sit down someone and say, "Hey, guess what? I don't believe anymore." Right? Because it causes all these alarm bells and stuff. And if you're saying like, you need to sit and actually listen to this. So I accidentally did the right thing by just saying to my wife, "I don't think I can go anymore." And
Right.
left it at that. Like, it wasn't a big thing. So at first it wasn't a big thing because it was just like, "Oh, okay, yeah, you're not going to go. So that's fine." And then as time progressed, and as there was like pressure from external people and from the minister calling our house and things like that, it became a lot. And that's kind of when I went through that angry phase, because I was like, okay, well, why don't people just leave me alone and let me be who I am?
Yeah.
And like I said, I was more mad at myself for duping people into thinking this, because I'm thinking like, I'm so stupid. I should have just come out right away and said, "Hey, I don't believe this." So
Right. Right.
and then it would have been better, because then people wouldn't have expected me to go, and they wouldn't have expected me to pass the plate around. They wouldn't have expected me to be part of things, and committees and this, that, and the other, right? And it's just like, it's just too much. Like, I don't want to be part of this. And I think part of what happens when you tell somebody that you don't believe the same thing as them is that it feels like an attack on the person. Because somebody's beliefs, their deeply held beliefs, are kind of attached to their person, right? Like they've grown up and they've molded themselves around these beliefs. So it's really hard to differentiate between the person and the belief. So Dr. Daryl Ray, who you've had on here as a guest, he has a book called The God Virus. And the reason why he wrote that book is because he's talking about it as being kind of like a biological thing, where the virus, in quotation marks, is the religion, because it's attached to your system, and they have things like vectors, like priests and ministers and all that are administering this to other people, right? Like, it's kind of, you can see the analogy. I really like the analogy. I think it's good, but I also don't want to be rude and make it seem like it's a negative thing
Sure.
all around, right? But basically, if he talks about, if you're sitting beside somebody on a plane and you say to them, "Hey, I see you wearing a cross there." He says that what happens is you'll see there'll be a noticeable change in the person's attitude, the way they talk, the way they look. They kind of have like a smile on their face, and just kind of, it becomes a different person. And at that point, you're kind of talking to the belief, right? And then if you excuse yourself, you go to the restroom, you come back and you sit down again, and you say, "Hey, how about them Eagles or whatever. I don't know sports.
Right. Sports ball. Yes.
Yeah, sports ball. Then they turn and they just become the normal person that they are every day, day to day. So the one thing that I think from that is that, if you're addressing the belief and you're talking about belief and you're talking about what it is that you don't believe and how you're different from that person, you're going to put up the defenses because they're going to turn into that belief and they're going to, have those defenses and build up the walls. And it's going to be really hard to have those conversations. And that's what I was running into, because all I was doing was bringing up the belief and saying,
Right.
how could you believe this stuff? And, going down that path, right, and making it really negative. And so that really drew this big line on the floor between me and my wife, because I was addressing all of the things that were making her who she was and tearing them down and making it seem like a negative thing. So to her, she internalized it as, okay, you don't like me as a person. And that's why I say it's really hard to differentiate between you and your beliefs, right? Because you are technically one entity. So that's when I started going down the path of learning things like street epistemology to be able to get at the heart of why people believe what they believe. And I'm developing this thing that I've been talking about on all of my talks lately, and I'm probably going to put it in my next book. But I call it the mutual triangle, or the three mutuals. And the very first one is mutual understanding. So if you can ask Socratic questions to get at the heart of why somebody believes what they believe, then you can develop that understanding. And the key word in this being mutual. So the first thing is that I would say to someone like my wife, what is it that gives you meaning? What is it that gives your life meaning and purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And, so let's just say it's somebody on the street. So I talk to somebody on the street and I say, hey, what is it that gives you your life meaning and purpose? And they say, well, Jesus gives me my meaning and purpose. And I go, oh, okay, cool. Why is it that Jesus gives you your meaning and purpose? Well, that I think that he was a good person and he helped feed the homeless, and I like to feed the homeless. So this is why I do this. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Now I understand where you're coming from. Right. And then they'll ask me, hopefully, what is it that you believe and why? Right. And then I'll say, I really don't believe in any deities or anything supernatural. I feel that the natural world is good enough for me. And if they say, well, why do you believe that? And I'll say, well, I just haven't been presented with sufficient evidence to believe that anything supernatural exists. Mm-hmm. Right. And then if they can get to the point where they're like, oh, okay, I totally understand where you're coming from, then we have that very first baseline, which is the mutual understanding.
Right.
The next step is the mutual acceptance. Now, this is a little bit harder, right? Because I can understand why somebody believes what they believe, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to accept that.
Right.
Maybe it's a harmful belief that they have, and I'm not going to accept that, right? So the conversation is going to kind of stop there, or, maybe I'll take the conversation in a different direction. And this is the one thing that I talk about with my wife. Like my wife and I, we share probably, 98% of the same shared values.
Right.
Whereas if she was say super anti-LGBTQ or something like that, we wouldn't have that same shared dynamic where I think we do, right?
Right.
So this is where the mutual acceptance is important, is trying to figure out what it is that they believe and why, and then getting to the point where you can accept that. So I can accept, oh, she wants to see her father again when she dies. I can totally accept that, right? That's totally acceptable. I know she can accept where I'm coming from, right? So it's that's the next step in that. And then the last step, which is the hardest to get to, is the mutual respect. Mm-hmm. Because you can accept somebody for who they are and what they believe, but getting to the point where you actually respect them as a person, all the parts of them, right? That's the hardest part. And I think that's really what we're aiming for when we're going for finding the common ground that we need to continue to make the world a better place. So it goes beyond the acceptance, where you are like, okay, now I completely understand where this person is coming from. I can accept where they're coming from. And then I actually respect them as a person. Mm. And you don't have to ever respect the belief, right? You don't have to respect whatever it is that they believe, but you can say, I respect you as a person because you have inherent dignity as a person. And my biggest thing is I'm hoping that the world will see that well-being is a good thing, right? And empathy is a good thing. And, just aiming for that. And if we can get to the point where everybody is at a mutual respect for each other, regardless of what our beliefs are, then I think that's where we're aiming to be. So I was able to use the techniques from street epistemology, which, epistemology is just the study of how you know what you know. Mm-hmm. And the street version of it is just asking Socratic questions to get at the heart of that, right? So using those techniques and using things that Dale McGowan talked about in his book, In Faith and in Doubt, which One of them was creating a word cloud. So you go on the internet and you type in word cloud and you type in a bunch of words that have something to do with your relationship with this person. Whether it's a friend or a spouse or whatever, you can just type in a bunch of words and you'll realize that you have so many more things in common than you don't, right? Like we had things like love and children and marriage and hugs and kisses and whatever. We had like all these words that were just made this giant word cloud, and words that weren't on there, we don't even know what they are because we had so many things that were just in common. Another thing that he talks about is you can make a chart. What are the positives to having an interfaith relationship? And what are maybe some of the negatives, right? So one of the things that I learned about my wife is that she put on her negative side that she wishes she could be more of a Christian than she is. So I was like, oh, well, now that I know that, what is it that you need to feel like more of a Christian?
Mm-hmm.
And then she's like, well, I want to go to church once in a while. I want to take the kids to church once in a while. I want to do this, I want to do that. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Any of these things that make you happy and make you who you are, I want you to do that. Right.
Yeah.
And one of the positive things that we both put on there is that the kids get to see different worldviews and be able to ask questions and get to understand the world for what it is. So I'm really lucky that my wife is so open and honest and understanding, right? But it's not going to work for everybody. And this is the hardest thing that I think people need to take away from this, is that it's not easy and it's not guaranteed that this is going to work, right?
Right.
You have to, like the key word being mutual, as always, right? Like you have to put in you have to go 50% and they have to go 50%.
Yeah.
Right. There's nothing that you can do to force somebody to accept you or force them to understand you or force them to respect you. So that's something that you have to try and earn, but also at the same time, I don't want to say that you have to earn it, but that you have to do the work if you want someone to do the work with you as well. Sorry, all of that to say that.
Yeah, I love that. So, or understanding, acceptance, and respect.
Yeah.
I love that. That is, again, much more eloquent than any time I've tried to answer that question. So.
And it's easier on paper, believe me, because you can write it down and then you can change it.
Yeah,
the current book I'm writing a sequel to Humanism from the Heart, and it's called Humanism at Hand: Practical Principles for Peaceful Partnerships. And I'm trying to do it as more of like a hands-on guide as to like, how to have these conversations and how to overcome certain obstacles and things. And one of the things that I've done so far is I've written about 4 or 5 chapters. I've scrapped them completely. I've started over. I ripped out part of a chapter. I took one chapter and moved it to another spot. So like it sounds like it's eloquent on paper, but it is a lot of things that go into it because it sounds good in the end, but while I'm stumbling across it, it does take a bit of time and stuff. So.
You've basically given us the answer, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask specifically about raising kids. I don't know about you, but there were tension points in my relationship as we had slightly, not dramatically, but slightly different values about what we were trying to pass on to our kids.
Yeah.
Was that ever an issue with you guys? And how did you overcome that?
Yeah. So, oh man. Okay. So when my wife was pregnant with my first son, that's when we were kind of going through a lot of the difficulties in establishing what it is that we were going to have as our home baseline, mm-hmm. right? Like we didn't really have an understanding of what it is that we're going to be aiming for. So it was kind of like I'm not going to hold it back from telling them this. And then she's like, I'm not going to hold back from telling them this. And then we were kind of like, this is kind of annoying to each other. Because I'm sure someone who's religious doesn't want their spouse telling their kids that there's no God and mm-hmm. things, right? So,
right.
And at the time she was pregnant, I probably would have been more forceful in my worldview. I would have tried to force my worldview more on my kids than I would now.
Understood.
And I think that reading things like Dale McGowan's book, Parenting Beyond Belief, and his other book, Raising Freethinkers, it shows you the step-by-step guide on how to do this in a way that's respectful to the other parent and respectful to the world in general. And then not only that, but just the tips in order for someone to not indoctrinate their children. Because you can indoctrinate your children into atheism too.
Yeah.
And indoctrination is just if they're not allowed to question what they've been taught,
Mm.
right? And I feel like there's families that are atheist families that are like, you know what, my kids will never step inside a church. My kids will never, see a synagogue. They'll never do whatever. And it's like, I think that's a hindrance to their development, because at some point they're going to say, well, why can't I do that? Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's something magical that happens inside that building, or, a lot of times kids will rebel against their family and do the opposite of what it is that they're asking them or telling them to do. Right. So,
Yeah.
so I feel like there's something called the 9 best practices that Dale McGowan has established for raising free thinkers. And I kind of mentioned a couple of them earlier, but leaving them unlabeled is important, because he wouldn't say, well, they're a Detroit Red Wings child, or they're a
Right.
Toronto Maple Leafs child. So why would you say they're an atheist child or a Christian child? And it just puts this label on the kids that they don't know what it is that they're defending, right? So it's like, how are they supposed to defend this label if they don't even know what it is? So give them the chance to build their own foundation, and then it'll be a stronger foundation for later on when they have problems and someone says, well, you know what, Vishnu can help you with your problems. And you're like, oh, really? And they'll go
Yeah.
and investigate that, right? But it's like,
Yeah.
if they already have a foundation of like, okay, well, I've already learned about these different things. So this is another thing, religious literacy. So learning, especially the prominent religion in your area, being fluent in that type of language and knowing the stories, at least, right, of just like the bare bones stories, because then they have that basis for knowing what it is that people believe and why about the prominent religion in their area. And then it just gives them kind of like I hate using this word, but like an inoculation to basically
Yeah.
say like, I already know this story. I don't need to hear it. Right.
Right.
And then there's other things like encouraging curiosity. So encouraging them to be curious and ask questions. There's the one part in my book where the kids go and ask the blind man a question, and it's like, it's a totally different question that I thought they were going to ask, but it turned out to be this beautiful thing in the end where, they ask him what his favorite bird is.
Yeah. I loved that. It made me laugh out loud. Yeah. That was
Yeah. Well, and it's just like, like, okay, I'm thinking like, why would you ask a blind person what their favorite bird is? Right.
great.
But it turned into this magical moment because he gets down to their level and says, no one's ever asked me that before. Pulls up his sleeve, shows a magnificent, fiery phoenix, and says, the phoenix is my favorite bird because like me, it's risen from the ashes. And it was just this beautiful moment between my kids and him. And it's like the curiosity, right? The curiosity and the kindness that kids can express. And I think that encouraging them to do that type of thing. Another one is encouraging empathy, because if you say, oh, look over there, that girl, what's her facial expression? What do you think she's feeling right now?
Mm.
Oh, she looks sad. Okay, well, what could we maybe do to make her feel better? Right. And it just encourages them to go over and say like, hey, are you having a bad day? Or, is there anything I can do for you? And, it's almost like the common courtesy thing that we've just kind of forgotten over the years. It's like to be able to just ask people if they're okay, or to give them that grace. And, there's so many other parts of the 9 best practices that are super nuanced, right? Like, I think people should pick up those books if you can, the Parenting Beyond Belief and Raising Free Thinkers, if you're thinking about having kids, or if you have kids and you want more hands-on ways to deal with some issues that may arise. Those are the most important things that I've gotten from those is those aspects of the 9 best practices. But I did mention in my book, even at the point, I think I had one blurb I even said, check out the 9 best practices in those books. But Dale McGowan's really put a lot of thought and effort into coming up with ways to encourage kids to be open, honest, friendly, and understanding.
Amazing. All of that was very practical, great advice. That's amazing. A last topic that I wanted to ask you about is about things like Sunday assembly and other attempts at secular church, for lack of a better term. Building a community, maybe that comes together on a weekly basis. What has your experience been? What are some of the things that you point to that you say, hey, that actually works really well? And then maybe what are some of the problems of why this hasn't just taken off completely?
Yeah, so I started it. Well, first of all, there was an atheist group that was in my area here that was attached to the university at one point. And I think that it had lapsed. Nobody had taken it over. And I joined the group on Facebook and I just said, hey, is there any people that are actually doing things together anymore. And people are like, no, people have moved on. Like this, it's a university town, so people will go to university and then they'll move away with the knowledge that they have. So I kind of took it over, and we relabeled it to the atheist community of Windsor, which is the area that I live in.
Okay.
And that became like kind of like the jump off point for the group that we first started. And then from there, people were like, you know what, this is cool. We're sharing a lot of memes and it's kind of funny and this, that, and the other, but we're wondering if we can maybe start a group that's going to start helping the community.
Mm-hmm.
So we created the Ambassador Humanist Association, because the Ambassador Bridge being right here.
Okay.
So it was kind of cool. So we had a lot of people, and even on the Detroit side, that were starting to be added to this group, and we were trying to do some stuff for the local area. And Humanist Canada got wind of this, and I was at BajaCon in Sarnia, Ontario, which is Blue Water Atheist Humanists and Agnostics Conference. You've had Bob Barnes on here a few years ago.
That's right. Yeah. You know my catalog better than I do. Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
I'm not sure if you know this, but Bob just passed away recently.
I did.
Yeah.
I did see that. That was very sad. Yeah. I think he had a huge impact on community. So very sad to have.
He really did, and he was a super important person in Canada. Like he opened like all the KOA campgrounds throughout the country. So like he's a really important person and probably the best person for the job at the time to create this conference. So at the conference, I spoke to the president of Humanist Canada and the executive director at the time, and they just said like, "Hey, would you mind rebranding your group to be our first chapter?" And I'm like, "Okay, cool." So we became Humanist Canada Windsor chapter, and then after that, we started doing a lot of things around town, like feeding the homeless people. We started adopting streets, so we have an adopted street. We want to adopt a park next, but basically we're picking up garbage on the street, and it's a really good opportunity to wear our Humanist Canada shirts, and people come up to us and say, well, what is humanist, right? And then we have the opportunity to talk about that again. So we started doing that. So that was kind of the very first inklings of a group that I was able to be a part of and do some of the community work that had been needing to be done. And then I caught wind of things like Oasis groups, which are kind of like a non-religious community of people who get together and discuss life, right? And same thing with Sunday Assembly. And then there's also the ethical cultural societies, ethical culture, which are amazing as well. So all three of these groups, and I think there's probably more out there, but these ones here are like the core ones that you hear about a lot. And what it is basically you're going to have a guest speaker who comes and does like a motivational talk. You're going to have time for like fellowship and food. So basically you're going to have, people bringing in food and maybe it's a potluck, or maybe they're going to have something catered in, and you just have a discussion afterwards about anything that happens to be going on in your life. So it's the same type of thing that people are looking for in the communities of, the religious communities that are happening. But some of the things that we're running into, first of all, things with these groups have to be volunteer. There's not really any money to be able to pay full-time staff to run these things. So people kind of have to do it out of the kindness of their heart, right? We don't have like a minister who's getting a salary. And then again, on top of that, more monetary issues would be, people not like, we don't really pass a plate around. So we don't just say like, hey, you have to contribute to be part of the society or whatever. It's like they have to want to do that. So they'll have to want to put money towards it. And a lot of times people won't really understand the whole financial burden of running an organization like this, especially because like the places that we need to rent to be able to do these things, right? Like that's a huge cost. The food that comes in is a cost. There's usually like an insurance fee that you have to pay to make sure that you're not setting fire to the place, right? Like these types of things. So people don't really understand that aspect of it. And then the other thing too is that if people who have come out of a church community, sometimes they don't really need that community. Sometimes they're like a loner, or they decide that like, I don't really want to be part of a community. So it's hard to get those people out to come out to these events.
Yeah.
And then there's also people who are traumatized by the community aspect of religious institutions. So then they're like, yeah, I'm definitely keeping I'm not touching that with a 50-foot pole. So all of these different problems kind of add together to make one problem, which is, we're not having enough people come. And if you don't have enough people come, you're not getting enough money. And if you don't have enough money, you can't run the organizations to happen for people to come in the first place. So it becomes a big circular issue.
Right.
I had the opportunity to be the president of Sunday Assembly Detroit in 2024. So that was a really cool experience because I was able to be basically the head of the organization and kind of see how money gets spent and how things happen and how you have to manage the internal conflicts and things that happen. And just cool to see that from the inside. It just depends on what you think is cool. But
Right.
for me, it was neat. I like to be part of leadership because I think that there needs to be people that step up to allow these organizations and just any type of organization to happen. Because if you don't have the people, then you don't have the programs.
Amazing. Steve, because I have been in your seat when someone is interviewing me, I know that sometimes the host doesn't ask all the right questions. Is there a question I haven't asked or a topic that you wanted to cover?
I think that the algorithm is not our best friend sometimes. And I think that I'm really trying to get the message out there that we do have a lot of things in common with other people. We do have a lot of common ground that isn't treaded on a normal basis, regular basis. So I think that trying to get the message out there is a difficult thing because there's people out there who come up really quickly because they have a message of like conflict. And I think that conflict is a big thing that's taking over the internet right now. So you'll see like, hundreds of thousands of clicks on things that are firebrand this or debate stuff over here. And the stuff that we're doing, it doesn't pick up as quickly. It's got more of a slow burn. And I think that the people that are fans of ours or people who are in our communities, they're not the vocal type. They're the ones that'll like to sit back and listen and maybe share it with a friend or two. And I think that sometimes I expect that our message will get out there a little bit faster or, we'll ignite. And all of a sudden now we're going to be the ones, at the top talking about all this stuff and making it happen and making the world a better place. So I just think that, shows like this are important. And I think that we need to get the word out. I think the word needs to get out more that we do have a place for other people, whether there's a God or 10 gods or no gods. It's we, the people, need to have a place. We need to have structure. We need to have community. We need to have love. And I think that that's one thing that we need to work on.
I love it. I think it's the fine line between a lot of us were burned in the kind of evangelical world.
Yeah.
And so we're a little cautious to have a positive message out there, but there's a way to do it that also respects the people that you're talking to be able to still have a positive message and give it away. Right. And I think that is an important thing to do.
Absolutely.
Steve, you have lived up to all of my expectations. I cannot say enough about the book Humanism from the Heart. People should go check that out immediately. Obviously, there will be links in the show notes. I'll also have a list of the book recommendations that you've given throughout as well. But if people want to get in touch with you, how might they do that?
Yeah, so I have Facebook is where I normally post all of my stuff. I'm actually starting a new series. I'm posting things that are important milestones and things that have happened in my life. There was one that I posted today about a burnt tree. Now, this is really funny because there's a conservation area near my house where we normally walk. And there's this tree that happens to be in this weird, like L shape, upside down L. And it's really burnt on the inside. And my kids for years have been asking me, what happened to that tree? Like, why is it like that? And my older son, Nathan, he was like, I really feel bad for that tree. It's really sad. I wonder what happened. And I said, well, it probably got struck by lightning or something, or maybe there was a forest fire. Like, we don't know what happened to it, right? I didn't know until someone pointed out today that it does have a history, which I'll get into in a second. But I was just like, I really wish I could make my kids feel better about this situation. I really wish there was something I could say or do to fix it. And I realized the last time we were walking through that I don't need to fix it. It's okay for them to think these things. It's okay for them to have feelings about an inanimate object like a dead tree, right? For them to experience grief and pain and that type of thing. And I think that, understanding that the universe doesn't have the ability to care about us but we can care about us. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway that I got from this situation.
Mm.
And so I posted that on Facebook, and I'm getting a lot of traction on it. There's a lot of people that are saying, it's a really good message, and things that people haven't thought of before. And I think that that's what I'm trying to go for is opening people's minds, because I've heard so much negativity and so many nasty comments at people about, them feeling a certain way about things. And I think that, being able to be vulnerable and show certain scenarios from my life, it enables people to say, hey, you know what, I've been there too. Or, these are the things I think about, and hey, I never thought of that before. So, but there is a history in that tree, and it basically was an indigenous marking tree.
Mm.
So it marked something like a site of some sort. I haven't really done the full digging into it yet, but people had actually destroyed it.
Oh,
So
no.
I'm actually thinking about maybe getting a group together and maybe raising some funds for like a plaque, to put a plaque there or something, just to say the story of the tree. And then that way it would help my kids as well, get through
Yeah.
the idea of that, this tree did have a place at one point. So
One last compliment. One of the things I really appreciate about your work is you are about doing something and something practical. And that is indicative of, what your work is. Right. And I really appreciate that. So,
well, thank you for saying that. It's important to get out and do the work, but it does take time and effort. And if you don't have the time, then I can totally appreciate that.
yes.
There's definitely been times in my life where I don't have the time to do things, and it ebbs and flows. So there's times where I do have time to do things, and times when I don't. And luckily, there's been more times that I have had the time. So
Awesome. Steve, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Final thoughts on the episode. I really do feel like Steve has put into words and on paper a lot of the things that I am often trying to say. And it is wonderful to connect with somebody who has the same view of the world, who's trying to do good in the world, who's trying to express what I call secular grace. And Steve absolutely is doing that in amazing ways. I'm going to take so much away from this conversation, from the funny, load-bearing Jesus, to the serious, the three mutuals that he discussed: mutual understanding, mutual acceptance, and mutual respect. That's amazing. I think his wisdom and insight about being in an interfaith relationship and raising kids in that environment is so important. And all of these topics are in his book, Humanism from the Heart, Building Bridges Beyond Belief. I very much recommend that you pick this book up and read it. Steve is a great writer. The stories will make you laugh. They'll make you think. I think it is essential reading for those of us who have gone through the deconstruction process or deconversion process, find ourselves on the other side, and are looking for how we build meaning in our lives, how we build relationships with the believers in our lives, and how we can do something good in the world. As I said at the end of the conversation, I think that's what I appreciate about Steve the most, is that he is about doing something. He is an encouragement to us all to go out and do something good. There will be links in the show notes for Steve's book. Steve, thank you so much for being on the podcast, for sharing your story, and for sharing your work in your book and being an example for us all. The secular grace thought of the week is based on Steve's three mutuals, and I really want to focus on the last one, the mutual respect. For those of you who are in interfaith or unequally yoked relationships, I think it is that last step of mutual respect that is the indicator of success or failure. I think it was really important that Steve pointed out that you don't have to respect the belief, but you are respecting the human being. And that human being comes with their worldview, their beliefs, their belief systems, And it's not just acceptance of the person, but also coming to a sense of respect for that person. It is secular grace. It is loving that person for who they actually are, not who we wish them to be. As Steve pointed out, it is not easy. It won't work in all cases, but coming to that acceptance and respect of your believing partner is the only way to build the relationship and have it thrive rather than just survive. The other practical advice that Steve talked about, using things like the word cloud to recognize how many values you share in common. So instead of focusing on the areas where you disagree, the beliefs, you focus on all the things that you do agree on. And I think you would be surprised if you go through that exercise to find how much you probably share with your partner that has never been voiced explicitly. So that was great advice. I've been talking to Michelle lately about coming back on the podcast. I think her initial hesitancy is that she doesn't feel like she has anything to say. I disagree. I think that you disagree. So one of the ways that I want to engage with her and have her come back to the podcast is for you to direct questions to her. So you can email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com and ask questions that you would want me or Michelle to answer about our relationship. Also, friend of the pod, Matthew Taylor, and his wife, Sarah. Sarah is a believer and Matthew is an atheist. We're considering doing a couples podcast on the same subject. So again, if you have any questions for all of us, please send them to gracefulatheist@gmail.com. Until next time, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast.